And we also have George David. He's with us right now, but I think he's just getting his camera set up. So he is here.
Okay. Well, we should wait till 3 to get the public access, right? So your Newport Beach manager buddy got the beaches open again, I see. Mark has a colleague who is now the city manager of Newport Beach.
Former coworker, about 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, you were 9 when you were working down there in Sunnyvale.
We were both 9. She may be younger than me.
So I do want to let everyone know that we are now live streaming on Channel 28, and we will get started shortly. Welcome to everyone who is joining us. We are waiting for some more task force members to trickle in, so welcome to today's meeting.
Okay, and as soon as we call to order, Priya, you're going to give any public observers instructions on how to join us. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, I will do that.
Okay.
So how do I start this camera?
So George, I'm actually gonna prompt you to do that. Hold on 1 second. So I just asked you to start your video, and you should be able to just click yes.
Yeah, and it doesn't come up.
Okay, so down in the lower left corner,
Yep.
there should be 2 icons. One of them is a phone, and one of them is a camera. And you're just going to want to go ahead and click on the camera.
Oh, wait a minute. I don't see a phone and a camera. I see mute and start video.
Start video. Yes, go ahead and click on that.
Nothing happens. It has an X. It has an X through it.
Yeah, I'm seeing that you have the ability to do that. Let me try that prompt one more time. Are you joining using an iPad or a computer?
Computer.
Okay. Sometimes computers, I see you, but then I see you go away. We can, if for some reason the camera isn't able to work out, George, we're still able to work with you being disconnected through audio. I think that Pat did that last time. So let's try one more time here.
Okay.
Okay, so I just sent the request.
Start my video, nothing.
Yeah, have you used this?
I used it.
Have you used this?
The last time.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Now on the same.
Okay. Okay. And Elaine, I'm wondering if there's any way you could move the computer just a little bit closer to you, so that we can see your face. You have a lot of light behind you. If that's better. Yeah, we want the light in front of you. I'm just getting some messages from our city clerk. I just want to make sure you're all seen.
There. How's that?
Okay, that's much better. Thank you. All right, George, let me see what I can do here.
Okay, I'm going to click it again.
Okay. Do you want to try leaving the meeting and then just completely rejoining? Do you want to try that? Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We'll get started shortly.
Still doesn't work.
Oh gosh. Okay, let me just try the request one more time.
George, I hear you perfectly.
Okay. So one thing, George, that we can do during the meeting is you can press #9, and that will allow you to raise your hand. And then Tom will actually be, during any type of discussion, he'll be calling on all the the task force members to speak. So you'll have an opportunity to talk. He'll actually call on you. Does that sound like a good plan moving forward right now? He should be able to speak.
George, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the St. Helena Financing Civic Infrastructure Task Force. I'd like to begin with Priya instructing those who wish to join us on Zoom or otherwise to explain that. So, Priya, please.
Sure. Thank you, Chair McBroom. Welcome to today's task force meeting. For members of the public, there are a few opportunities in terms of joining our meeting. So this meeting is being live streamed on channel 28. You can also join the Zoom meeting as a member of the public. You can also call into the Zoom meeting as well. So there are 3 ways that you can participate. In order to have actual public participation, there are a few ways that you can do that. So with all of our meetings up to 1 hour in advance, you can submit public comment. And then in the actual meeting, so if you're joining via Zoom, you can actually, there's a little button below your name that should have a hand. And you can raise that hand, and Chair McBroom will call on the hand during any time that there is public comment. So we will be recognizing hands when there is public comment. And if you're using a phone to call in, you can just press #9, and that will allow your hand to be raised. So those are the ways that you can do public participation. So thank you.
It's actually *9.
Okay.
*9, sorry, yeah. Thank you, Amalia.
Are we done? Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Nixon, will you please call the roll?
Member Ward?
Here.
Member Wallach?
Here.
Member Keneally?
Here.
Member Hale?
Here.
Member Honig?
Here.
Vice Chair David?
Here.
Chair McBroom?
Here. Thank you, Ms. Nixon. Before we start down the agenda, I'm going to let you know we're going to take things out of order today. We're going to open for public comment in a few minutes for the items of interest to the task force that are not on the agenda. But we have reversed the presentation on the long-range forecast and the report, the discussion of the task force report. So we're going to do the 10-year financial forecast before we get into the report. So before we start our deliberations, are there any comments from the public, Ms. Nixon, on items of interest to the task force?
Chair McBroom, let me see if there are any members of the public who would like to comment right now. I am not seeing any hands from the public being raised.
Okay, we'll then close public comment. We will ask for approval of the minutes from last meeting. So I hope you've all had a chance to read them. May I have a motion for approval of the minutes, please?
I move.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
George, we know you're out there.
I said aye.
Okay. Mr. City Manager Presswich and Financial Manager April are here to take us through the 10-year forecast, April minutes. So it's all yours, Mark and April.
Great, thank you. And I'm ready to screen share, Priya. Perfect. You should have just been given privileges to do that. Perfect. Thank you. So what we're going to talk about today is a long-range financial forecast. So this is a draft form. We know that we will go through several reiterations of this. Right now, as we all know, with COVID-19 going on, there is a lot of volatility, especially when it comes to the next 24 months that we are going to be dealing with, just trying to figure out what our revenue projections and losses are going to be. So what you see in front of you, you should see a table where it has fiscal year, property sales tax, TOT. Just want to confirm that everyone can see that screen. Is that okay? Got the thumbs up from Priya. So this is something that I put together just so we have it available. We can see what other previous trends have been during other notable events. This starts from fiscal year 1993 and goes through what we are estimating for fiscal year 2021. I know it's a lot of information in a sheet. Priya does have this, and it will be as a attachment to the ITF agenda. So what you see at the top is you'll see in column B right here that's highlighted, that is our historical property tax revenues. Everything up to fiscal year 18-19, which is line 28, those are actual numbers. Line 29 shows our adjusted, what we did at mid-year, because we did have some adjustments to our property tax and sales tax revenues as well as TOT. And then the next line item that you'll see is line item 30 across the bottom. That is what what revisions we made based on COVID-19. In particular, you'll see the very large drop-off in your sales and your TOT revenues right there. You'll see a decline in sales of 25% and TOT for the annual of 32%. And then the next line is our fiscal year 2021 estimated. And those estimated numbers are based off of the adopted fiscal year 20 budget. So we just want to make sure that that's clearly noted in here. You'll also see some highlights wherever you see red. Those are declines in particular revenues for that fiscal year. And on the right-hand side, you'll see for column L, you will see any notable events. So in government, we have our infamous ERAF shift, which is something that we would love to be able to forget about, but it was a state takeaway. So you'll see that's why you have a decline in those years. Next couple things that could have factored into our decline in revenues was the dot-com recession. Then we had September 11th, and then we also had SARS. The next notable event you'll see is the Great Recession. And so a lot of the modeling that's being done by cities right now for long-range financial forecasts and for revenue forecasts do model some of the declines in revenues based off of the Great Recession, and some of them even go a little bit deeper. So I wanted to point that out because you'll see during the Great Recession years, immediately you do see the decline in the sales tax revenues as well as the TOT revenues. Other revenues, primarily those sharp declines, have to do with building and the amount of building permits that we're taking in following the Great Recession. And then the one other one just to pay attention to, and we did model it in our long-range financial forecast assumptions, is property tax change. So that's the negative 5.81%. There is typically a lag in any reduction in property taxes. So if we see a reduction in property taxes, we'll note it 2 years out. We would not see it in the immediate year. So I want to kind of give everyone an idea of what's happened historically in the past as far as revenues based on other events. We also made a notation of Ebola, even though that didn't affect the Napa Valley as much, the Zika virus. And then down at the bottom, you'll see our COVID-19 going March 2020 till we don't know when it's going to end. And then on the bottom, just wanted to show you a graph of the revenues year over year changed by dollar amount. So you can kind of see your property taxes, the blue, the orange is your sales tax revenue, the gray is your TOT, and then the yellow is all other revenues. Primarily today, we're going to be talking about property sales tax and TOT because they do make up about 90% of our general fund revenues and do have a lot of volatility right now. So any questions on that preliminary sheet that we just talked about?
Could you remind everyone what the fiscal year end is?
Thank you. Fiscal year for the city runs July 1st to June 30th.
So the year listed as 20 is ending July of this year.
Correct. We're in June 30th of this year, correct. So about 2 months out.
So I didn't notice that the first time I read through this, but it really means that the substantial part of that year is already in the bag and reflects pre-COVID receipts.
Right.
That is correct. So COVID receipts are going to affect our March, April, May, and June. We know TOT is pretty easy to predict because what happened was TOT, I was going to share my screen and it finishes. TOT just dropped off, unlike the recession where people were still allowed to come visit us. For our TOT revenues, it literally shut off mid-March, and we don't know when that's going to be, when we're going to be able to open up those revenue sources. So what we've projected in the initial draft long-range financial forecast is that for TOT, we will receive no TOT revenues through June 30th. And then sales tax is a little bit is trickling in. We will not actually know March sales tax numbers until about the end of May. So again, reiterating how this is a very, very much a draft form, and we know there's a lot of fluidity in it because of the volatility of the market right now. So any other questions on either of the first chart that I reviewed?
Yeah, April, this is Tom. What are the underlying assumptions quarter by quarter on recovery of TOT and sales tax?
I will go through that in the next slide, the next couple slides that I have. So we'll talk about what the assumptions are for recovery.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this initial slides? Okay, don't see any. I'm going to move to my next slide. Okay, so now you should see something that says revenue assumptions baseline. Can everybody see that? Thumbs up? Okay. Yes. So the first couple pages are narratives. It looks like a lot of information, but I will actually review it fairly quickly. And then I have some graphs that summarize the information at the end. So the revenue assumption baseline, it does utilize the slow growth until fiscal year 25. And part of this came out of a discussion we had with the subcommittee of the task force, the budget subcommittee, where there is good indication that we should make a full recovery by fiscal year 25 as far as the recovery, or as far as the revenues, and that we should be able to recover back to what our adopted fiscal year 20 budget was. And so the assumptions below models this. It does model a U-shaped economic recovery, and then revenues return to pre-COVID-19 levels by 2025. So for property taxes, again, going off of what happened before with the Great Recession, the property taxes, we will not see a decline in the property taxes until fiscal year 2022, and we modeled the same slight decline of almost a 6% reduction. And then for fiscal year 23 and 24, we modeled a moderate increase of 2%. And then for the remainder of the long-range financial forecast, we've modeled a 3.5% base, and that's typically what we do for any of our long-range financial forecasts. So from years 25 to 30, we did a 3.5% increase. For sales tax, we're assuming for fiscal year 20. So for the remainder of this current fiscal year, we're going to collect 25% of what our historical collection would have been. For fiscal year 21, Tom, this goes to your point, is that we're going to start out at 30% of the prior year revenues in quarter one, and then we'll actually grow up to 65% of the revenues collected by Q4. And so this is also following a model that Napa is doing right now. The County of Napa, City of Napa, a lot of our counterparts in other cities, it's the same type of modeling that they're doing, so we're remaining consistent with them. In fiscal year 22, for Q1, we are projecting collection of 70% total being collected based on the fiscal year 20 adopted budget, and then we'll grow to the full 100% recovery by Q4. In fiscal year 23, we're showing that we're going to return to the fiscal year 20 adopted budget levels. And then in fiscal year 24 to 30, we are using the same growth as previous long-range financial forecast, which is approximately 3% per year. For TOT, on this one, it follows the same projections almost as sales tax once you get to fiscal year 2023. So for fiscal year 20, where we're currently looking to finish at June 30th, we're showing a 50% of historic collection for March, knowing that March dropped off about midway through the month, and then the zero amount collected through April through June. Again, with some of the governor's projected orders to loosen up in phases, we might see a little bit of growth, but I'm expecting if we do, it's going to be fairly nominal there. In fiscal year 21, for the first quarter, we're showing 10% collection of previous year's TOT. We'll increase it to 75% by Q4, again, following the same models as our counterparts. In fiscal year 22, we're projecting for the first quarter collection of 75% of what our fiscal year 20 adopted was, and then growing to that 100% level by Q4. And again, returning to the fiscal year 23 adopted budget levels. And then in fiscal year 24 through 30, doing a growth increase of 3% per year. We have also modeled another scenario for the secondary long-range financial forecast, which I'll show everybody. And this has the same assumptions as above. However, it does add a hotel to the mix, and the hotel, we would start seeing revenues for the hotel in fiscal year 25. And what we did is the hotel scenario we took was what was presented in the draft ITF report that I saw showing Farmstead. So I basically took kind of the revenue projections for TOT alone for Farmstead. What we did is for fiscal year 25, we based it on 50% occupancy. For fiscal year 26, we based it on a 75% occupancy, which matched what was in the ITF report. And it did not take into consideration additional sales and or property tax revenues. So I just wanted to, we know that those are some additional revenues that we will see. However, we did not model that into this current long-range financial forecast scenario. So what you'll see right here at the bottom of the chart, that will just show you property sales and TOT, so our three biggest drivers. You can see what your fiscal year 18 actuals were, your fiscal year 19 actuals, what we're modeling during the recession for fiscal years 20, 21, and 22. So for 22, you do start seeing a large increase in sales tax on TOT, but again, that's the increase off of the prior year, knowing that we're modeling once we get back to fiscal year 2023, that's going to be at the same levels that we were pre-COVID-19 fiscal year 20. And then, are there any questions on the revenue assumptions at this point? I know it's a lot of information.
Just a note, April, on the 2018 actuals for sales tax. That, I believe, represents the addition of Measure D to the revenue base.
That is correct. That is correct. So you do see the large increase due to the half-cent sales tax measure.
April, I have a question on sales tax. Also, the governor, I understand, has talked about a delay in sales tax payments for certain, I guess, retailers or sales tax payers. Has that been modeled in here, or what impact could that have?
That has not been modeled in here. The deferment is it's for certain businesses, I believe it's under $1 million in sales, and it's up to $50,000 deferral. And I've been working with the city contracts with Avenue Analytics, so they help us model some of our sales tax scenarios. And what we have to remember, out of the total dollar amount the total percentage that's collected as sales tax, the city gets a pretty small fragment of that, and our initial modeling with Avenue Analytics was less than, for us, total economic impact would probably be about $25,000 per year, maybe up to $50,000 per year. But at this point, and that would be based on 100% participation, so we did not model that, but it was definitely an additional item that we need to take into consideration that could affect these numbers.
But the big taxpayers in town are over that sales limit, so I assume they
Correct.
cannot defer. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So any other initial questions?
What are you targeting
Okay. George, I think you dropped off on that one.
Yeah, what are you targeting completion of Farmstead?
The projections that we put in here was for fiscal year 25 is when the city would start seeing revenues on that. Some of that would be dependent on is if there were any agreements with them where they would hold some of the initial TOT revenues received. So what we did is we started showing that the city would actually show revenue collection in fiscal year 25 in the second modeling scenario with a hotel.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? I can only see about half of the people the way the screen is.
If you make your screen full screen, you'll see everyone.
Oh.
See the little grid?
You know, when I do share screen, it does not allow me to do that. So I don't think there's any other questions. So I will move now on to our expenditure assumptions. And so what we did model, and there is, I already see an error in this. I forgot to take this one line out, so let me take that out. So for the reserve levels, what we're looking at doing and preparing the fiscal year 21 draft budget that we'll be taking to City Council, we are estimating using about $1.75 million in our reserves. For future years beyond that, so from 22 on, we are not anticipating using reserves, but actually starting to restock some of those reserves that we are taking from them from this fiscal year and next fiscal year. For salaries and benefits, our initial preliminary draft budget for fiscal year 2021 is basing that on a reduction of about 25%. Reduction in salary and benefits, that is primarily due to staff vacancies that we are going to be freezing for the time period, as well as other labor strategies that we're currently in the process of looking at. Additionally, for fiscal year 2022, what we're looking at doing is be able to increase our base for salary and benefits based off of fiscal year 2021. So we'll show an increase of 10% in fiscal year 22, an additional increase of 2.5% for 2023, and then going back to 2024 through 2030, it's going to be our normal projection of about a 3% increase per year. Health insurance.
April, could I comment on that briefly? On the fiscal year 22, what that 10% represents is really a relaxation of the belt tightening, which might include some salary reductions. So this is really going back to perhaps numbers that are in place today. So it's an artificial. It appears to be larger than it really is. It's just getting potentially back to less belt tightening, and probably includes some additional drivers like healthcare costs.
Correct. So the next line item for expenditure assumptions is on health insurance. Is the fiscal year 21 is based on our draft budget, and then fiscal years 22 to 30 utilizes the same growth as previous long-range financial forecasts that we've done. PERS unfunded liabilities, the information that we've put in the assumptions for the long-range financial forecast is based off of actuals for what PERS says our unfunded liabilities are for the next few years. The updates we will not have additional updates for PERS unfunded liabilities until September. So really, that will affect part of our long-range financial forecasting from fiscal year 23 on, based on what CalPERS, whatever their discount rate is and whatever their losses or gains are for this current fiscal year. So that's information that we will know in September. Once we have that in September, then we can actually plug into the models, because we'll know if they ended up realizing gains or losses, how much, and then how much more is going to be put on the city for these unfunded liabilities.
And then this does not factor a decrease in the discount rate that would go into effect in fiscal year. It's actually 23. Services and supplies for fiscal year 21. This is based on our preliminary draft budget, which is a reduction of 34% from our fiscal year 20 adjusted budget. Following the same line as salary and benefits, you'll see this consistent in the next couple categories, where in fiscal year 22, loosening the belt a little bit for what we tightened it from this fiscal year, and then going up 10%. So we'll take a pretty good jump next year, but it's still well below where we were at. In fiscal year 23, we go up to an additional 2.5%. And then for the remainder, it's our typical 3% increase. Sorry, I realize I have some extra lines in here I do not need. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out my extra lines. We basically, by fiscal year 25, we do return to the pre-COVID. Oh, sorry, that's what it is. My apologies. We do go back to pre-COVID levels by fiscal year 25. So we have an increase of 10% in 1 year, 2.5% the following year, 3% in fiscal year 24. Sorry, that's where I made my mistake. And then we're returning back to the pre-COVID levels in fiscal year 20. And in 25, and then from 26 to 30, we're going back to the 1% increase per year. And this is going to be the same pattern that we'll follow for maintenance. And again, my apologies for the typos in there. For taxes, insurance, and contributions, those are items that we don't have a lot of say to, so we're just basing that on historical increases. We are not counting for any new debt with debt service in this particular long-range financial forecast. For our capital expenditures, what we're doing is we have an 86% reduction in capital expenditures for what we were planning on purchasing. Most of this is equipment. And then it will follow the same patterns. We'll increase our capital contributions in fiscal year 22 by 10%. We'll do an additional increase in 23 by 2.5%. And then for fiscal years 24, we will have a 3% increase. Fiscal year 25, we'll return to pre-COVID-19 levels. And then for fiscal years 26 through 30, we'll have a 1% growth. And then transfer to other funds. So primarily the transfer to other funds include any transfer to capital projects, special projects that we're doing, any contributions we have to make as part of our maintenance of effort for SB1, as well as our transportation or Measure T. And so what we've done for this upcoming fiscal year, our assumptions are modeling that we have done a 66% reduction from the fiscal year 20 adjusted budget. Part of this is also removing $380,000 that we typically would take cash from the general fund and move it over to our street CIP to meet our MOE requirements for Measure T and SB1. What we are able to do, and Mark and I had talked strategy on this probably about 2 years ago, knowing at some point we would have a recession, and we know allowable expenses under the MOE. It allows us to actually charge time and materials for our streets and storm drains budgets. So this is implementing that strategy where we'll no longer transfer the cash over, but we will actually take funds that are already being spent towards the maintenance of streets. And so we no longer have to make that transfer. So that has been taken out of the transfer for next year. And it also decreases the amount that we've put towards other CIP projects. In fiscal year 22, we are going to increase capital contributions by 10%. Again, fiscal year 23, we're going to increase it by an additional 72% based on what the reserve levels were looking. And fiscal year 24, we're returning it to pre-COVID-19 levels. And then fiscal year 25 to 30, we're projecting a 3% growth each year for the contributions. So what that looks like in charts, I try to model. Try to see where you can just see the one. What I did is I took those various scenarios, the assumptions that we're making in both the revenues and the expenses. So you can see in graph form, you have your property taxes in your blue, your sales tax in the orange, and TOT in the gray. So you can see pre-COVID-19 where we drop down to what it is currently, what we're expecting, and then you'll see a slow rise back up to where we are projecting we're under this assumption model where we'll be at in 2030. And then same thing for expenditures. You'll see it follows the same line where we have pre-COVID-19. We tighten the belt on every category, and then we're going back up to our 2030 levels. Any questions? And again, I apologize for the confusion on my typos in the expense summaries. Are there any questions, initial questions on these before we go to the long range the actual projection forecast?
Do you have dollar numbers for the various departmental cuts? You gave them to us all in percentages. Do you have those in dollars?
I don't have it by department for today, but I do
You said
have
like salaries and benefits is down 25%. How much is that in dollars?
the salaries and benefits. Let me pull that. I have it on another screen real fast.
I can answer that generally.
Okay.
We haven't. We're going to review on May 14th a budget workshop with the City Council, various approaches to how we balance, and so conceptually, one approach would be to assume some form of cost savings from labor that would account for approximately 25% of a gap that we're projecting of approximately $5.8 million for fiscal year 21. And so that would represent close to $1.5 million. It's a target, but it's subject to the council's feedback. We need the council to agree with a comprehensive strategy on how we balance next year. And so that number is just a placeholder at the moment.
I also would like to comment. I understand about, changing staffing and so forth and the decreases in that. I just don't see how you can model maintenance with that big of a drop as well, because it's not like you don't need to maintain these properties. So I would caution dropping that maintenance budget as much as you're dropping, everything else, because the other ones seem to make sense to me, but maintenance, I think you might need to be a little bit more generous on that.
So
thank you.
I had a concern on maintenance of effort, but you've done an excellent job. I was concerned that if you don't pave and do the road work, you're going to lose Model T, Measure T funds. So, which Model Ts go over, never mind. Anyway, so very good. So you solved my concern.
April, I have a question on Measure T itself. That's a sales tax, county sales tax. Have there been any projections about what may happen to our share of Measure T going forward? Has the county done any projections?
We have been working with NVTA and have done some initial projections on what Measure T revenues are. The percentage that the city of St. Helena will receive will not change. However, the dollar amount will change based on the sales tax collected. The information was actually in the staff report that went to City Council on April 14th, and it talked about the preliminary decrease in revenue. So we've done the same modeling as NVTA has.
So over the next 3 fiscal years, we were projecting a reduction of approximately $997,000 in Measure T revenue. So just for purposes of a placeholder today and using these assumptions that are subject to a lot of volatility on sales tax, because we don't have any receipts yet based on the current COVID model and what might be happening with online sales, we're projecting approximately a $1 million loss over 3 years.
I have a question. Have you stressed this budget at all? In other words, assuming worse performance, what the result might be?
As far as worse, Mark, were you going to respond?
Well, I guess I was going to ask for some clarification. We have modeled a second round of losses due to a second round of COVID, assuming April, May, June next year, and what happens if a second round of that happens. So in our view, that may be one of the worst case scenarios. I think other than perhaps I have some concern over the hotel estimates next year. The fourth quarter estimates have us returning to 75% of pre-COVID numbers. That may be slightly overstated. We modeled 65%, and that was a $100,000 impact. But if we had a second round that occurred in April, May, and June, and we use the same assumptions on sales tax and hotel tax, we estimate that's an additional $1.3 million impact to the general fund in the next fiscal year, on top of the $5.8 million gap that we're solving for.
I have one more, which is, I don't know, some of this might be enterprise related, but is there any delay or forbearance from the governments that are involved in any of the things that we're obligated to do, like the sewage treatment plant or the dam removal or anything like that? Do you think any of that might be eased up?
I guess I can jump in a little bit. I think there's an effort today with the League of California Cities to establish some financing opportunities for California cities via the state of California. It's too early to tell whether something like that will become available, but we anticipate potentially some state as well as federal solutions or programs that may be available to us. All of our forecasts today assume no dollars in any form of economic relief for the city due to the sacrifices that all of our businesses have made on behalf of the state and the country. However, if anything does come in, that would just be additional dollars that would reduce the impacts for us. So I think it's too early to rely on any assumptions in that space, but I think we remain cautiously optimistic that something will materialize.
My question wasn't so much about relief as it is about forbearance on cease and desist. Do you think there's any chance of getting...
We're not... I think one of the things that we're focused on in the city is moving forward with key projects. And so when we present and talk to the city council about our budget on May 14th and beyond, because it will be a fluid discussion until June and mid-June probably, our interest is in, and I think the council will agree, that our focus is on continuing to deliver and focus on delivering key capital improvement projects. So, for example, we have bids coming in on the construction of the York Creek Dam removal project. That project is bidding now, and bids are due on May 18th. So by our second budget meeting, we will know the actual cost of that project. And that project is planning to be completed by the end of the year.
So April, have you got more to show us?
Oh. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Yes, I'm going to go back to my screen share. So all of those numbers that I just gave you, here's what it means based on the assumptions that we've presented today. So
April, are you able to zoom in a little bit on that?
Yes. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the first scenario. So this is a scenario without the new hotel. So you'll see based on fiscal year 20, you'll see on line 6, we have an annual deficit of $1.78 million. So that's where we're projecting that this current year is going to end up. Next year, you'll see we are recommending the use of $1.75 million in reserves. And then you see here all those assumptions that we already discussed. This is what it does to our ending fund balance, where you look at line 8, and then you can see the unassigned net position. So that's our percent of our ending fund balance that we have. Our city council currently has a 30% reserve policy. So modeling this particular scenario, we do actually start replenishing. We do dip a little bit into our reserves in this fiscal year. The following fiscal year, the reason why you see the decline is because your expenses are higher than the previous year, but it still does maintain above our 30%. And going to the point of the maintenance, where maybe we do need to actually increase some of the maintenance, we do have the flexibility to put that in the modeling. What we wanted to do is just kind of come up with a scenario on where we thought our revenues are, where we think our expenses could potentially be, and where we can see how we can start rebuilding our reserve levels. And right underneath that, you'll see this is a chart. So you'll see our revenues are in blue, our expenses are in orange, and this is historically. And then over the year, the gray line, you'll see where we're actually dipping into our surplus and where we're starting to replenish some of our surplus. And then you'll see the yellow line in the middle. That is what our ending fund balance is. So you'll see right now we're above 5 million. We're going to be dropping below 5 million, and then we'll tick back up to probably about the $8 million mark. So that is the first scenario with the baseline.
Let me jump in here also, April. I think there's a couple words of caution on this. The estimates for 21 and 22 are going to be subject to a significant amount of volatility. And I think the other thing that this is still a work in progress, so we're working between now and the 14th to refine this, but I think we have to take a careful look at making sure that in the out years we are restoring our investments in the maintenance of facilities to optimal levels. And then secondly, please note that this does not include any debt service for any investments in buildings that we might want to construct or lease down the road. And so with those types of additions, the green line here, line 6 on surplus or deficit, in many of these years would move those numbers south of 0.
So how are you approaching housing City Hall? Assuming nothing new is built, which is your assumption here, then what happens?
I think maybe a different way of answering that question is that in this model, we're not assuming anything is built. But I think what we'll anticipate doing is building a third model that includes, or a fourth model, third and fourth model, that will include some debt service to model the debt service on a new building or buildings.
So this assumes that the City Hall will remain where it is currently, the employees will be housed as they are currently?
This is just one model, and I think what I'm hinting at is that we need to present an additional look at what would happen with if you overlay debt service on these current assumptions. And what my takeaway is from looking at these numbers is that we're not going to be imbalanced with a new building this time. So I think that's one of the additional analyses that we'll be presenting to the council on the 14th.
And as far as additional funds that are being contributed to capital projects, what the model is that was in front of you, it does show that in fiscal year 23, we've now bumped back up capital projects investment to $500,000. So it does put some money aside for capital projects, but we all know City Hall is one of many projects that we have a lot of expenditures that we need to maintain those projects. So any other questions on scenario 1, and then we can move on to scenario 2?
So, yeah, I guess I do. So, Mark?
Oh, sure.
So do you plan on utilizing the information we have put together on the cost of option 1, which includes the new City Hall, the storm sewer problems, and that 11 million or 15 million? Is one of the cases you're going to present going to include our costs of option 1 and the debt service associated with that?
I think it's fair to say we can model your option 1 and the option 2. We are in a bit of we didn't want to get ahead of you either. And right. So assuming that those numbers stick, we can apply those numbers to our assumptions here and run a scenario or two. Sure.
Okay. Thanks.
Question: did the existing numbers put anything in on an ongoing, regular basis for the storm sewer?
No, I think. Go ahead, April.
Oh, it did not. It just put it was a blanket number of about $500,000 that gradually increases by 3% each year, and it was for general CIP projects, but they weren't designated to specific. The money wasn't designated for a specific project.
This is kind of running as we have been running. It didn't set aside a certain amount for specifically for storm sewer in a 10-year plan or anything.
We haven't modeled your recommendations, and we are about a month or two away from, probably 2 months away from a preliminary report from a consultant who's been working on an underground utilities master plan, which will help us with some of those numbers and forecasting.
Okay, I will share my right screen here. Okay, so here's the secondary model. So that's scenario number 1. The second scenario that we ran, so this was showing the hotel going online and the city starting to receive income in fiscal year 25. So I believe this goes to some of the questions that were asked on modeling option 1 and option 2 from the ITF. So while it's not specifically modeled the exact same, what this does, it takes into consideration the modeling done for Farmstead for TOT only. So you can see the dramatic difference in what happens to the general fund reserves. So here you go from 37% to 34%, now up to 89%. And again, this does not assume debt service. So when we do the scenarios, if we're modeling the option 1 and option 2 presented by ITF, what we would do is we would add the additional debt service in here so we could actually see what it does to the reserve levels. But knowing that this assumption for just one hotel does make quite a big difference as far as the revenue stream for TOT alone. And then here you'll see, right below, you'll see the baseline with hotel. So again, you see what happens to the general fund reserve ending balance, where it goes up above the 15 million mark. So hopefully that answers some of the questions regarding modeling what it could potentially look like with just one hotel. Again, just affecting TOT only. We did not add in the sales tax assumptions. So any questions on, and that's what I have for the long-range financial forecast. Again, reiterating what Mark had mentioned before, that we know it's very volatile right now. We know the next 24 months are going to be really telling for what happens with our revenues, particularly sales tax and TOT. And what we wanted to do is just get general feedback from you if there's any fatal flaws that you see in our plan or something that maybe we hadn't considered yet, or that we've, maybe we're modeling too steep or not steep enough. So we wanted to get your general reaction to the long-range financial forecast in the draft form that we have right now.
So do we have any additional comments or questions from the task force for Ms. Mitz or Mr. Presswich? Hearing none, see if there's any public comment. Ms. Nixon, do we have any public questions or comments for Mr. Presswich or Ms. Mitz on the subject of the long-range financial forecast?
Chair McBroom, I'm looking right now to see if anyone has raised their hand. Again, you can do that using the raise hand feature, pressing *9 on your phone if you're calling in. I am not seeing anyone who has raised their hand to participate in public comment, Chair McBroom.
All right.
Wait, hold on. I do actually, sorry, there is someone who would like to speak. Just give me 1 second. All right. You're unmuted and you're able to speak now. Hold on 1 second.
Oh, sure, I'm muted.
I am clicking the unmute button, and it's not, I think, oh, there we go.
Okay, the question is, when you're modeling the Farmstead TOT, are you including a rebate of some of that TOT to the developer for offsite improvements that are constructed, which is often what happens in our development agreements?
I can answer some of that. I think that's a good question because the development agreement and on this project is not complete. So what we did is assumed that the hotel would open in fiscal year 24. and essentially took a parked revenue for a year and assumed that it might be equivalent to 1 year of hotel tax. And so it's essentially an approach to holding back on some of the enthusiasm related to how much revenue would come in. But that's a number that would be subject to the development agreement, and we may not see the same amount of revenue as early as we otherwise might think, depending on the agreement that would be in place and the cost of the improvements that would be conditioned on the developer.
Are there any additional comments or questions from the public?
Chair McBroom, I am going to give it 15 more seconds here just to see if anyone else is raising their hand. And I am not seeing any more folks who want to participate in public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nixon. I'll close the public comment and ask the task force if they have any more questions or comments for Ms. Smits or Mr. Presswitch. Hearing none, thanks, Mark and April. I'm going to move on.
Thank you for your feedback. So I just want to say thank you for your feedback. That helps us to be able to keep developing this. Thank you.
I'd like to move on to item 5.1, which is the review and discussion of our task force report, which I'm sure you will look at by now. So what I'd like to do is ask task force members who wish to go around and have their say about the report, what they think about it, what they thought was important in it, whatever you'd like to say. Now is your opportunity. So you want to go in order? How about Ms. Ward?
I thought it was a great, well-rounded report based on all of our subcommittees. A couple things that I think maybe City Council should think about when they're taking this report into account, and the city manager, is that maintenance of the properties owned is super important, because otherwise we end up in situations like we are in now, where buildings are non-functional. So keep that in mind. But also, I think that the recommendation to slough off some properties that are not being fully utilized is a good one, and that should be a primary function, like as soon as possible. There are a couple, buildings that just aren't bringing in the value that they could potentially if you were to sell them. So the recommendation to sell some of buildings like the Carnegie building is probably, something to put up in the forefront of, since we are going into this period of uncertainty with not as much income coming in. And then the other is, if we go, approving hotels and things like that, we're already at a staffing shortage for many restaurants and hospitality, and that's due to the fact that we don't have anywhere for people to live, and the commute is not offset by what they would be making. So I think that having a pretty big focus on workforce housing is super important for the holistic, attitude of this entire city. I don't know what happened. I think I may have dropped off.
Oh, we have you.
Okay, I don't know. My camera just dropped for whatever. So I think that that's really important in a holistic view of a healthy city, places for people to live. Being able to staff these new hotels in the next 4 years also depends on having places for people to live. So that is all. Those are my comments.
Thank you. I could go around and call on people, or you can jump in. Ms. Honig.
Hey, Tom. Maybe
Go ahead.
Maybe I'd ask Philip, are you saying that we should explicitly recommend the sale of one or more of these properties in the report, or are you? I'm just trying to make, because I think our purpose is to get any final comments that belong in the body of the report.
Mm-hmm.
So on housing,
if I were writing the report, I probably would say yes. We should make that recommendation.
We have made the recommendation. So the question is, does it need more emphasis, or are you saying now that it's fine? You just are making a point to that is in the report and you think it's...
It is in the report, and I'm just kind of reiterating that that's something that people should really focus on as a front-running, agenda item.
Pat makes a good point, though. I mean, I'm giving people an opportunity to comment on the report. I think if you think the report needs to be modified in some way, then you should add that to your comments. Or if you're just stressing a point, that's fine. But we're going to move towards a vote at the end of the session to either approve the report or not. And Pat and I need to know if we have more writing to do.
I'm stressing a point because
Okay.
I believe it is addressed in the report.
Anybody else? Dan, I know you probably do.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think how to best suggest what I think Philippa said is pretty dead on. I think if we could strengthen the language on the importance of taking a holistic approach and kind of developing the methodology, the sort of methodology of approaching these things that first commits to sort of preserving the sites, the number of options that we have of sort of the pieces that we can view as assets. First committing to sort of preserving their value, not degrading them. And I think by doing that, you're preserving them for either open space or as a viable asset. I think that would be kind of stage one. I do think that we have to, if we can strengthen the language on the workforce housing commitment and getting the city to understand that it needs to participate in that to the fullest extent that it can, because I think regardless of whether we, like Philippa said, if we do or do not build hotels, we're at a current deficit on that need. We've not addressed that need. So I think if we can kind of put these pieces in the right order, that we are considering hotels, we also at the same time have to commit to more than sort of just lip service to addressing the housing, the workforce housing need.
So do you have a suggestion on what we might ask the city to do?
Well, I think it would first should identify the spaces the ways that it can participate. Say like by better utilizing, say the corporate yard space, finding out the ways that could be available and could be powerful as a solution. Same with railroad. I think if the city can look at sort of adopt the methodology that by any of these considerations where they're choosing to build any of these solutions, by considering fully that if they build it here, they free up this other space. How you guys word that, I think it's important that it's in there, that they adopt this kind of practical methodology of addressing the entire ecosystem and the inventory of sites that it has, instead of I don't think it can afford to kind of offshoot as it's done a bit in sort of vacuum tube approaches. So
I'll throw a few straw men out there just because Tom and I have discussed it a little bit in trying to figure out how to word it. The city has some space where we could build workforce housing. Should they give it away to workforce housing developers? Literally give it away.
I think they should absolutely consider that. I think the way we've looked at that, there's sort of two options. You can sell it to a developer who will build a certain amount, who will understandably want to build a certain amount of solutions, or you participate with a local partner or some other partner that will be more concerned with just delivering to the workforce housing need. In that case, I think it's entirely appropriate. I think either of them, it's appropriate that the city consider the value as part of its contribution to solving that need.
So, George, I'm going to ask one other question that I just didn't get a chance to ask you the last time we were together. On hotels of this level of luxury, what's the rough ratio of employees to rooms?
On a real luxury hotel, it's 2 to 1.
So the thing that I'm getting at is that if we build 150 rooms of hotels, which is about what it takes to get the city on a good financial footing going forward, you would need hundreds of units of workforce housing if you wanted to be completely holistic, or you'd need shuttle bus services down to Napa, or you need something for traffic mitigation. You know, it is one of the sort of uncounted costs of some of these hotels that they require a lot of workers in a way that some other property uses potentially do not. So,
but you also have to consider that a holistic approach means that we should apply the same standard to all industries. It's not just the hotels. Obviously, we have some 2,000 or so folks that are coming in every day or more to work here, and they're not obviously they're not housed here. So, do we need to look at all of the businesses and see what their contribution ought to be?
So I'm saying if the task force wanted to recommend something bold that didn't work against hotel development, because if you said to the hotel developers, it's great, you can build a hotel, and please put in your financial plan that you got to build 100 units of workforce housing at your expense, then no one's going to build a hotel, right? So if we want to be easy in terms of encouraging people to actually do it, you know, one of the ways that the city could actually think about it is that they'd have to be really explicit, not about driving a hard bargain with some, you know, workforce housing developer. It'd have to be easy with that developer, just like they would be with the hotel developers, to keep things in balance. So if you're going to encourage hotel development and make it tough to build workforce housing, it's tough. So maybe the way we append our recommendation is we say to these guys, you need to get serious about giving away real property and real concessions to get real housing built right now. Otherwise, the hotels will make this worse in the medium term. That's not a big rewrite of the report. That's a paragraph or so. But I think that unless you sort of get a little bit numeric, the city council, you know, past city councils have shown that they don't take action.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think that makes some sense. You do have to, when you think about this 2 to 2.5 to 1, you have to realize that a large number of those people really aren't looking for housing per se. They're looking for a place to stay. And I mean, you could actually accommodate a large number of these employees in a rental project per se, as opposed to a true affordable based on income housing. And I know it's a mix, clearly. And obviously there are some employees that would be able to buy a house even in St. Helena because they would be compensated correctly. So, you know, it's sort of you have to look at every hotel in a different way and try to figure out what footprint they're going to implant here and what people are they going to need to make that happen. And that's something that is a science.
So I think the thing for us to consider is, does the admonition that's in the report currently, which says workforce housing is important and it's lacking and needs to be part of any future hotel negotiation, that's what's in there now. Does it need to be strengthened to be more specific? And that's the question we're going to come to in a minute, whether we can approve the report with some sort of an addition or whether you would like to see a whole new report.
Well, let me possibly give you a different approach. We have the right to ask any developer to do whatever we think is right. And obviously, there's a lot of negotiation that is involved in these processes. So I think we might be better off telling our city council that they simply need to impose on a potential developer, whatever development from my perspective, what they need to contribute to this city. And if they're not willing, then they can't build it.
Any further comment?
I'm going to pretend to be a hotel developer for 5 seconds and say I would not do anything that scares them off. We need the money.
Right. I think George has a point, but I think the tenor of that negotiation and our outreach and understanding as a city to hotel developers or restaurants or anybody who's looking to do business here, it's got to be a more of a partnership mentality where we understand that what they're bringing and what we're providing, we're on equal footing. It's not, I don't think it should be a shakedown approach. I think it needs to be a positive, healthy, like any good relationship where you understand that you're both bringing to the table what the other one needs.
Yeah, I think that's a given. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's a given.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
As do I. I was just trying to make sure that we give the city council the right tone, because everyone's idea of what's a balance in those negotiations
Right.
is different.
Well, I gotta take a little more time than I should probably, but our report I think is great. But we're looking at everything essentially from a financial perspective. You know, how much TOT we're going to create, how much sales tax, and make these comparisons based on those things. The reality is that every hotel that comes to the community has the capability of delivering much more than just money to the community. Someone who would develop an Adams would be someone who would feel that they had to create an impact for the community, not on the community, in the sense of creating jobs, making philanthropic contributions, bringing arts and knowledge to the community. I mean, I could go on and on. There's a lot of tangential elements that all involve a partnership. And the higher and the more upscale the resort is or the hotel is, the more likely you are to attract somebody who has that philosophy and who recognizes that they must be a part of the community, they must be contributors, and they have a lot to contribute, and they've done it elsewhere and they can prove it. So.
Tom, you're muted.
You are muted, Tom.
Thank you. Are there any comments on any other subjects?
Yes, I've got one, Tom, which
kind
of follows on this. When I was reviewing the 3P, the public-private partnership, one of the skills they brought to the development was the ability to promote in the local community. And we haven't said anything about that. Maybe that's not part of our project, but anytime you're going to rely on hotel development, there will be people that don't want to see that. So I guess the question is, how do we indicate that part of our work is that promotion of the plan needs to be included? Somehow there needs to be some financial side of that to help promote the development in the community.
George, you probably have more experience than this than anyone. You want to comment on that? Public outreach prior to development?
Well, I don't know about making that a financial consideration. I think it's just more important to define what the community wants, and specific to whatever real estate is being considered. And let's leave the financial considerations to whoever develops a particular site and make it part of the negotiation. It's going to work out that way in any event, no matter what we put on paper. So I would prefer that we leave it open.
Okay. Thanks for the input, because
I have a comment. Does anyone have a comment before I go here? There's been some, I think, there's a chance that people may question why we have proposed the Adams Street development only if we are on what we call option 2, which is to pay for a large combined city hall library. I mean, one might ask, well, why not develop Adams Street and build a smaller city hall, and then you have some excess money, I suppose, to pay for other things besides what is in the general plan infrastructure category. We did not approach it that way because if you build a smaller city hall, you don't need to sell Adams Street to pay for it. But if you sell Adams Street and develop it and build a smaller city hall, then there should be excess funding to do other things. The reason we didn't go there is we were asked to look at the infrastructure funding. My take is if the city council or the city management wants to look at developing Adams Street and using that for expenses other than infrastructure, that's up to them. I mean, the numbers are in the report. They can see what the value of developing Adams Street is. And if they want to use that for something else, that's up to them. But that, to answer people who may ask, why didn't you include it as a primary option? We didn't need it to pay for a smaller city hall development. Pat, you may want to add something to that. I'm not sure I made that.
I think you said it. I think you said it really well, which is even before COVID-19 gave us a 37% reduction in revenues for next year. The city's reserves were modest, and its operating budgets were small. So the sort of the general size and scope of the Adams Street development and the uncertainties that grow along with the size of the project, make the big combined building that was one of our options only can be paid for by selling Adams Street. There's no other way to build the big building. So because our starting point was this huge building, Adams Street became the way to pay for that. We weren't asked to comment in general which of the properties we develop in general. We were asked to compare two options, and the whether you develop Adams Street or some other place has got more to do with the vision of the city. If you're just going to build a small city hall, no matter what. So, to me, it's a little bit outside our remit to be giving the city too much general advice. We're all really well informed at this little moment because we had a very detailed snapshot, and it's easy to go off mission. But I think especially while the report is, sort of on the city council's table, that we make sure we give them the guidance that they need. And to me, after giving them the option that we choose, the most important general conclusion is it really takes 150 or so hotel rooms to put you on a significantly different financial footing than you were on before this whole thing. And how you build them at some level is up to you. So in the short term, we're recommending option 1. In the long term, hotels seem like a good way of getting the revenue that you need. And much beyond that, to me, feels a little bit like they're extra bonus recommendations. They're not the core of what we were being asked to do.
Yeah, can I jump in again? I agree with what you just said, Pat. I think it's incumbent on the city council to take Adams to the next level and to determine in far more detail, based on professional input, as to what the additional benefits could be to the city and what the expectation should be. Because otherwise, how can you set it and how can you really, truly evaluate the project?
Yeah, I think that just building that big combined building is not enough of a wow to convince the population to sell the Adams Street property. And what George says is exactly true, is that if somebody brought something truly revolutionary for the city, got it really well defined and said, we could give you this if you sell Adams Street, it probably has a much more compelling reason to sell Adams Street than just to build a combined city hall and library.
Well, I'd add another thing. We need to go to an RFP process to sell it to anybody. And if we don't do an RFP, which, by the way, is not doesn't obligate us to sell the property at all, but it does tell us what level of interest is out there, who's interested, and what their capabilities are, and what they can bring. So, you know, until we ask, we're not going to attract anybody, because we have a process that says we have to go out to the public and solicit offers. So just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, as a spectator, it seems that no other piece of property of the 5 that we came across where there are realistic shots at a hotel being built, no other property has so far brought the bee's nest of public comment around it. So a reason for not preferring Adams Street on a financial, one of the reasons for not preferring Adams Street on a financial basis is that it maybe takes the longest to build because it's the most hated, whereas some of these others, because they're owned by private people already and because they seem to have not been hated as much already, they may be faster to market. And we need the money sooner versus later. So, again, to pick the biggest and thorniest project is a hard thing to recommend right now when the financial need is acute.
I'm not suggesting we change our recommendation. I'm just saying that there's a whole lot more that could be done to vet that property in the event that we choose to sell it.
I agree with you.
So my hope is that our report will serve as a basis for discussion on topics exactly like this, about what steps do we take next, do we do an RFP, that sort of thing. We're getting ready to open for public comment unless I'm going to open still to the task force, or maybe Mark or April too, if you guys have any questions or comments. Okay. Why don't we see if the public has anything to add to the mix here? Ms. Nixon.
Great. Yes, thank you, Chair McBride. We do have someone here who wants to speak, who's raising their hand. I'm going to unmute you right now, Glenn. Glenn, you should be able to unmute yourself now and speak. There we go.
Can you all hear me now? Yep. Okay. So just a couple comments. First one is, I think before you come up with any firm recommendations, I think it's important to actually go back and take a look at the long-range financial forecast that Mark and April put all that time into, and actually run a scenario that has the debt service included of $1.3 million a year, the storm drains of $500K a year, and whatever the right level of maintenance is for all the other buildings to ensure that they don't continue in a state of dilapidation like they have for like the last 5 or 10 years. And the reason I'm suggesting that is when you have that data, that will help you figure out how many hotels maybe you need at optimum to actually fund the finances of the city going forward. Not just to basically continue to tread water, but actually put the city in a position, over the next 10 years where they're ahead of the game as opposed to just constantly playing catch up on the financial side, which I feel is the way the city's been operating. So I think that scenario to show those significant expenditures would be helpful to make that decision or help draw the conclusion or support the conclusion. And it will also help basically on the Adams Street question because, that's almost like the white elephant in the room because people don't want to talk about Adams because it is very contentious. But that being said, it's the major jewel of the city right now that could turn the financials or the financial position of this company around very quickly, both in terms of one-time revenue and also TOT. So I think it's important that, we not just basically sit on the fence on that, but we actually come up with a recommendation, or you would come up with a recommendation as the task force as to what's to be done there, because I agree with George. There's nothing harmful in taking a closer look at Adams so we have more facts on which to make a decision, including a better understanding of what developers might do for the city if they were to come in and develop that project. Things that we couldn't do as a city by ourselves. So I think that would be important to do. The other comment, the last comment I'll make, is around the workforce housing. I've heard this issue bandied around now for 20 years that I've lived in St. Helena. And before we figure out what workforce housing looks like, we need to have a lot more information around what workforce are we trying to accommodate? Retail, police, fire, exactly who is the workforce we're trying to accommodate? What are their income levels? And are they looking for rental or ownership or whatever? Because we keep talking about workforce housing as a very generic topic. And I think we need to have much more specific information on what do we mean by creating workforce housing? Because it sounds really, really good, but I don't think we really know what that need is. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Mr. Goltz. We have any other public comment, Pray?
I'm looking right now. Hold on one second. So again, anyone who wants to participate in public comment, in the lower part of Zoom, there's an option for you to raise your hand. I just want to make sure folks know how to do that. Just give it about 10 more seconds to see if anyone wants to raise their hand. This is the public comment time. So Chair McBroom, it looks like there is no one else who wants to raise their hand and speak during public comment.
Oh, thank you. And then we'll close public comment and ask the task force to any other comments they have, or would like to comment about what Mr. Goltz had to say or what each other had to say. No. Okay, so I think the decision we have to make right now is whether to amend this report. And I think the only amendment I heard, Pat, maybe you can help me on this, but was to maybe put some stronger language in on negotiation on workforce housing. I'm not
actually
sure
not
exactly
advocating. I'm not advocating that. I would be satisfied with the report as submitted if you just make sure that the point is forcefully made at the time it's presented to the city council, and that we respond to questions in a concrete way if the city council asks.
Okay. Any other comments before I call for a vote? Okay, so like a motion to approve this report as the final report to be submitted to City Council as is. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Raise your hand.
I'm raising my hand.
Thanks, guys. Any other comment? I mean, I really appreciate the work you guys did on this. It's a good team effort. And I'm pretty proud of that report, the way it went out. I'll say that now. Mark, do you have anything else to add?
I want to echo your comments, Tom. I really appreciate everyone's time and contributions to this report. It's very helpful for the city. And I think we also received some very helpful feedback today. And I anticipate we will be bringing additional modeling to the council on May 14th that will show differences when we add on the storm drain, when we add on the cost of debt service, the numbers really will show that absent additional revenue, the numbers don't work long term. So I think that's very helpful feedback. So just again, thank you for all your time with this project. Appreciate it very much.
And Mark, I think to you and your staff, same. I mean,
Exactly.
Particularly Ms. Nitz and Ms. Nixon have been wonderful to work with, very helpful, no pushback, very cooperative. We appreciate that very much.
Tom, could you perhaps give us just a couple of words of where this goes from here, and who do you need to be with you for what, and what, if anything, can we say to anybody now?
Mark, you want to comment on that? And also, what do you think the next step is for us with City Council?
Yes, so I believe we are eyeing, I believe it's June 3rd or June 10th. I think the answer is June 3rd for a joint meeting of the City Council and this task force so that you have an opportunity to answer any questions they have or provide clarification. So what we will be doing over the course of the next week or so is checking calendars and trying to land on a date and time that works for everyone. And I believe that's the date. I'd have to check an email real quick, but I believe it's the 3rd of June. We were looking for a Wednesday, and I was going to recommend a 6 p.m. start to facilitate more public participation in case there are people working that afternoon.
Okay. I'm sure you will let us know. Okay. How about now? I assume we're under the same admonition on press contact. We should refer questions we get from now on to the city.
Well, to the chair or to the city, and you would still be a public body, which also speaks to the Brown Act responsibilities. If we have a joint meeting of the city council and the task force is essentially still a public body. So again, it will be important to not talk to more than 2 additional people and avoid a quorum related to discussing these topics.
Any other words of wisdom before we depart? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? See you all. Thank you very much.
All righty. See ya.